Welcome to the She's Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey there. As I sat down to record this, I realized I have a lot going on right now, so I thought I'd just give you a quick update. First, if you happen to be in the Tucson area or know anyone who is, I'm going to be speaking this week at an event there. I'll be at the Summit Huts Speedway store on Thursday, October 4th at 6:30 p.m. And I'm providing a talk. It's Tips for Trekkers. And it's sponsored by Loa Boots. I'm a brand ambassador for those folks. And they're sending me down to Tucson. And it's part of a month-long celebration for the 50th anniversary of the Summit Hut. And it's also Oktoberfest. So there's going to be stuff going on all month long. So if you're in the Tucson area, come on by Thursday, October 4th. Come see me. And then come back throughout the month for lots of events that are going on. If you are interested in winning a pair of glare-ups, I know it's a super funny name, but they have these amazing slippers, glare-ups slippers, and we're headed into autumn, so you need slippers for around the house. Go to the show notes for information on how to enter to win a pair of these super warm, thick felt slippers. They're fantastic. I work from home. I love wearing them around the house, so go check that out. I am headed off to Ireland next week. I'm going to be leading one of my tours through Wander Tours. That's my company. And so I'm going to be traveling for the next couple of weeks. But hopefully I'll still be posting episodes while I'm on the road because I've got some great conversations lined up for you. And you can follow along on Facebook. You can friend me there and on Instagram. And if you do send me a Facebook request, send me a message as well so I know where you're coming from because I don't accept every request. I get a lot of spam requests. So if you do send me a Facebook request, just let me know that you heard about me because of the podcast. Let's see. Finally, if you do happen to be following me on social media, you likely know that I just ran the Cascade Super Series Ultra this past weekend. It was 50 miles. I know, 50 miles. That's crazy. And what I'll probably do is follow up in a future episode and I'll talk about it more in depth. But I will just say for now that it was actually, I know this sounds really crazy, but it was less difficult than I expected it to be. Now, it certainly wasn't easy, but it was doable. And I mean, right, obviously it was doable because I finished it, but it didn't kill me. And I was literally up the next morning and I went for a 3-mile walk. And that was my way of getting in some active recovery. Now, this 50-miler was a great test for me to determine how I might do on the Epic 5 runs in November. And in case you haven't heard me talk about those, that's 5 ultra marathons. It's 50K, and that's 31 miles in 5 days on 5 Hawaiian islands. So I run in the morning, jump on a plane, go to the next island overnight, run the next morning, jump on a plane, go to the next island overnight, etc. So it's 5 islands. And I talked about my training for Epic 5 in episode number 94. That's actually when I thought the 5 runs were going to be in September. That's when they were originally scheduled to be, but they got moved to November. So I've had a little extra time to get some other races in, like that 50-miler. And what's really cool is I just got into the Dublin Marathon. And it's a wacky, crazy coincidence. The Dublin Marathon is actually the day after my Ireland tour ends. And I was going to be in Dublin anyway. So my plan is to run the Dublin Marathon at the end of October, and I jump on a plane and come home the day after that. So that's a lot, I know. But that pretty much gets you up to speed on the exciting events that are around here. Don't forget Tucson. That's the big next one that's coming up. So, okay, Beth, what about today's show, you say? Well, today's conversation is with Danielle Bogardus. Danielle is a philanthropist and an entrepreneur. She is the founder, president, and board director of Connect 3. It's a nonprofit which she started in 2014. So Connect 3 assesses the educational, waste management, and water needs in developing communities. And what they do is they empower local people by helping them find solution to these issues. The program started in Peru, where she was doing undergraduate work with the University of Washington. And it started in Peru, but now she's gone on to do work in Ethiopia, and she's looking for communities around the globe to continue that. Now, all of this is pretty remarkable, but what is more so remarkable is that she's just 23. Now, I have a lot of inspirational women on this podcast, but I can't say that I've ever met someone quite like Danielle. I just don't know how someone so young has such a mature, well-rounded view of the world and so much forethought and compassion to dedicate her time to bettering the world. And I'll fully admit that might say more about me than about Danielle, because as I say in the podcast, I just didn't have her level of maturity at 23. So big, big kudos to her. I know that you are going to love this conversation. She is really amazing, very inspirational. Really, just listen for yourself. This amazing young woman, Danielle Bogardus. Yeah. So you're saying that in the nonprofit world, oftentimes there are big backers. Is that kind of how it is? Like maybe the more privileged person or the person with money or more experience or coming from a family that has that information or that just kind of innate knowledge of how something is run. That's more common.
Yeah, or at least operating in a social scene where there is privilege, and as soon as you start asking your family, friends, whatnot, that close circle to you are going to be in a position to be able to give that money much easier than someone who has come from a less privileged situation or family.
You grew up in the Seattle area, right?
Bainbridge.
So you're on Bainbridge Island, Seattle area. For people listening around the country or the world, it'll like knowing that it's a Seattle area probably makes more sense. And the thing that I've noticed over the years, because I've lived here almost 30 years, and because we have so much more money here. I mean, I've lived here longer than you've been around, than you've been alive. I've seen maybe more changes, or, maybe you've witnessed it yourself, but I have seen that the immense amount of wealth that is in this area. And so kind of what you're talking about is that people who are starting nonprofits, maybe they came from Amazon, maybe they came from Starbucks, or they came from Microsoft, and that's fantastic. And then they're going off and doing good work, maybe starting a nonprofit, but they can tap into that wealth that's here because they have those connections. Like that's a perfect example of how, like, maybe someone didn't even grow up in an environment where philanthropy was, part of the family, or just like kind of part of their DNA. But because they have access to funds, it's easier for them to start up an organization.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. And you're not doing that.
No.
Which is unfortunate.
A little different path.
Yeah, that is a different path. Gosh, we have a lot to talk about, and I'm so excited to chat about it. But you know what? Why don't we just dive in, since we're talking about philanthropy and nonprofits? Why don't we just dive in and kind of start talking about what it is that you're doing now, and then we'll kind of go back in time and talk about how you got there. So would it be fair to say that your main focus right now is Connect 3?
Yes, I think my main focus is Connect 3 in partnership with the orphanage that I started working for full-time this last December, Yadi's Village. So those two have been really congruent, which has been fantastic, just at a little bit different levels. So Connect 3 is happening at essentially a global level, and then Yadi's Village has been a project that I've been able to take on and focus in at a local level, but it's also served as a case study for Connect 3.
And that village is in Ethiopia, is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain what Connect 3 is?
Yeah, so Connect 3 is an assessment organization. And so what we're trying to do is look at the communities around the world who are struggling to sustain themselves in the face of environmental, infrastructural, and health stresses. And so we're looking at the primary stressors of water contamination and scarcity, inadequate waste management, and lack of access to relevant education. And then to be able to do that, Connect 3 uses simple and holistic assessments to understand the path to resilience for each situation from a local to national level. So while we are our own entity, so much of this has been about connection and how to open up that conversation to be able to bring in the correct stakeholders to really make that path to resilience strong for each community, but then scalable to a national level.
There was a lot in what you just said.
Yes, I know.
So I want to break it down.
Yeah.
No, I think it's fantastic. It really is. But I want to break it down a little bit. So what you're doing, and I'm going to just repeat what I think I heard from you. What you're doing is you're analyzing villages and you're focusing on education, waste management, and water.
Correct.
Okay. And so what you have done, and we'll go back and we'll talk about, in the future, we will talk about this because I want to know how you got there. But basically what you have done is you've identified these 3 areas as kind of basic problems in developing countries or developing areas and nations, cultures. I wouldn't say nations, but in regions of countries around the world. And so through that, you are bringing these 3 things together, the Connect 3, and providing people with a more sustainable, healthier, more educated environment, an understanding so that they understand it better.
Exactly. And I think, well, I will dive in a little bit to why I've approached addressing resilience and sustainability this way. And for me, when I went into Peru for the first time now, 5 years ago, it was so obvious that the aid projects, whether it be NGOs or governmental agencies, were using this top-down approach where they just assumed that they knew what the solution was, or it was the newest, fanciest technology out there for water filtration or waste management. And it was hitting these remote communities, and it would last for maybe a week, maybe a month, maybe 6 months, but then there was no follow-up or base level education and integration within the community, or even a conversation about what local based knowledge these communities had throughout their whole development to the point that they were at. And so for me, it's always being able to figure out why are they doing what they're doing, because there has to be reasoning behind that.
Why they're doing what they're doing, meaning it may not be the healthiest thing for them,
right,
but it's habit or, what they've learned. Is that right? So you're trying to understand, kind of reverse engineer that and understand why they're doing what they're doing for that.
Exactly. And like what those relationships are and where the barriers are at, because there's so many different social, environmental, financial reasons that are shaping the actions of communities with whatever sort of developmental stage they're in.
Can you give an example? So the first place that you worked, volunteered or spent a lot of time was in Peru. When you went into that village and you started to kind of formulate this, what were those observations that you had? Were you thinking like, oh, I see why they are kind of this, having a better water filtration system that the previous volunteers had provided, that's not working. It's for this reason. Like, were there any kind of light bulbs that went off for you and where you realized, oh, I see, this is just for this other reason that they're not implementing this?
Yes, there's 3 situations that stand out in my mind and really shaped the direction that I ended up going. The first would be that I drove into this community of Lucerna, super remote in the middle of the Peruvian Amazon on the Las Piedras River. And it's the last community that really connects Puerto Maldonado to this watershed that then connects up to the last uncontacted on the Las Piedras River. And a lot of mining and logging happens within this area at this point because it was opened up by a highway that was put in by China that connects ports in Brazil to ports in Peru, and it's called the Interoceanic Highway. Long story short, this community is the last jumping off point on this river, and so there is a decent amount of infrastructure, but it's not fantastic. And I get there, and I was thoroughly surprised because I saw garbage cans and recycling cans, and I was not expecting that. And so I immediately started asking around. But I came to find out that none of the community knew what they were doing there, how it worked. And so I came to find out that an organization had come in, and because they bring their researchers and tourists through, they wanted to have waste management present. So they just put in a whole bunch of garbage cans, but then there's no sort of contingency plan with where the waste goes. And so that's what led me down this road of really trying to understand what the waste management was like within these communities. And so that dove into this whole project of waste auditing, and there's zero waste management in these communities. So right now, we have been able to connect the local municipality with the communities, but at that time, 5 years ago, they were just burning, burying, or throwing in the river. And it led to a lot of frustration and tension from the community seeing these organizations come in and just kind of throw things here and there, but then not communicate or actually help with the longevity of the project. It was very obvious that it was just a superficial image-related Band-Aid,
and
so to speak.
They're throwing stuff in the river and they're burning plastic, I'm assuming, and just burning things because probably in the history of their community, everything came naturally. Like they were going in the jungle, in the forest, and eating the bugs and the animals, and there was no waste. Nothing was packaged. So this stuff gets introduced, and I see this all over the world. I mean, the information, I think, and addressing it is getting better, but in a place like India, you go to India and there's piles of garbage everywhere. Well, that's because it's been relatively recently, and I mean, I'm talking like tens of years, not 5 years, but it's it could be 40 years or so, that the introduction of packaged goods.
It's within one generation.
Yeah. So what are you going to do with it? You're going to eat your cookies and then you're going to throw it on the ground. And then it just gets, all this stuff, plastic and whatnot, gets piled up. And we get really angry about that. But you can see where they're coming from, right?
Totally. It's a lack of education, but then on a social level, it's also a socioeconomic status. And that's something I hadn't thought about either.
No
but
kidding.
As soon as I started talking to these families, they were like, well, yes, if I made enough money during the day and I have a little bit left over, because their time frame is very short.
Yeah, very immediate.
It's immediate. And so if they know that they've met their quota for the day and they have 10 soles left over, they're going to go buy a soda. They're going to go buy some cookies. And
well, there's no bank for them to deposit in it
exactly.
either.
And then also the families around them are going to see them drinking their soda and eating their cookies, and they did good.
Yeah.
And so to be able to say, no, you actually can't buy things when you have the money, that's a difficult conversation to have.
Yeah, it's not fair.
No.
Why would that be fair? So you went in and you looked at this, noticed that it was an issue, and then started making a plan around it.
Yep.
And this was you were at the University of Washington, is that right, at the time? So you weren't there full time in terms of like, you weren't spending 6 months to a year there at a time, but you were living there for chunks of time. What did that look like? Like how much time?
I would spend my winter quarter there. So in Peru, 6 to 8 weeks every winter.
And did you feel like that was a good amount of time to not only observe, but to implement as well?
If it were not for consecutive trips, no. We always joke that you get where you are wanting to start at week 5. So,
and then you have to abandon everything.
And then you have to be like, I'm so sorry, I'm leaving in 10 days.
Yeah.
So it was really difficult. But being able to spend the time with the community and go back to the same one for the first 2 years and then expand was huge, because that solidified a relationship. And my first trip there, I didn't take any data. It was all, well, I did take data because observation is a very strong data tool. But I was just there to observe, and I recognized that this was a situation that was so unlike anything I had ever been present for. And so I needed to take the time to just learn and observe. And so that was one of the biggest assets, I think, to the project, was being able to dedicate that time and really push for it on an academic level as well. Because that was difficult to pass through the University of Washington to just say, hey, give me credits for going and watching a community. They wanted hard data sets to be coming back to them. But I think being able to start at such an early point, year 1, it allowed me to come to collecting that data later on in a more honest manner come year 2, 3, 4.
I want to talk about that program at the UW because it sounds amazing. But I just share something quick with you. I go to Papua New Guinea every year. I've been going for probably almost 10 years. I think I skipped 1 year, but I've been going for about 10 years. And I go to the same communities. There's one specifically in the Sepik River area that's very remote, and it's very expensive to get there, for local people to leave their village and for me to get there with my groups just because of gas. I mean, it's very similar to going into the Amazon for that reason, just very remote, inaccessible places. But it breaks my heart to no end that I can't help these folks more on this level, like you're talking about, because I drop in, I'm there, I see them for 4 days over a 4-day time period, and I identify like, how can I help you? Can I provide funds for your daughter to go to school? What is it that I can do? And it's a full year before I get back. They'll make requests of me. Can you bring me a headlamp? Can you bring me carving tools? And the patience of them is unbelievable because they have to wait a year for me to come back to deliver these things to them. And it just kills me. It's so sad.
There's so many levels to that. And that has been a journey in itself that I was not expecting. I definitely saw it coming, but I just don't think I understood what it really meant until I was in that situation. And I still struggle with it. There's a lot of guilt associated with it. I got asked to work full-time for the Peruvian municipality of the Las Piedras area, and I couldn't do it. That wasn't my life. And to be able to dissect the reasons of why could I not commit to going and living in this community and helping each and every single one of them and just really fully dedicating myself to that. But I also couldn't leave my life here and my family here. And there's also this realization throughout that whole thing that you're not the answer. You have to be able to figure out how to ignite and draw responsibility into those localities. And that's been a beautiful lesson that I've been able to explore more with the orphanage, because all of a sudden we're now trying to raise and develop socially active children who have no family to teach them how to do so. And we're trying to operate that from halfway across the world. But not really. What we're really there to do is to be able to set up the structure and again, engage that locality to be able to support their own people and answer their own problems. And so we can provide tools, but you can't always be that point person of I'm going to save everything, because in reality, the longevity of that is not there. Mm-hmm. But it's a personal thing to be able to accept that and not feel the guilt or the sadness or the confusion of being like, I want to bring you school books. I want to bring you a new pair of shoes or some clothes or, let me do this or let me do that. And it is definitely confusing. And I think at least we're now starting to have that conversation around aid in general.
In terms of, what do you mean by that?
What you can do to help and what really does gain traction and is uplifting for that individual or community, or just creating more dependency. And we are in a very unique position where we are, no matter your background, more privileged than these developing communities.
If you could afford a plane ticket to get there, you're on a different playing field. Yeah.
Exactly. And while you can open up the conversation once you're there that, I work 3 jobs and I do this and I that, it's not just like growing up in America, all of a sudden you have this plethora of opportunity. I mean, there's work associated with everything, but to be able to know too that you have to be able to have that space where you're relating to someone human to human and not human to wealth, if that makes sense, or human to situation and privilege. And I think that's a really interesting point, just because there's something very uplifting to be able to be like, yes, I can help you and I can give you this or that in that moment. But then also at the same time, I know going back to a place and being able to see the value of empowering that individual to make them feel like they can do it themselves with the right tools is beautiful, because that that's going to end up creating so much more of an intergenerational change.
Yeah, and that just takes time.
It does.
Because I'm just placing myself in this village in Papua New Guinea in the Sepik where we're Facebook friends. I'm Facebook friends with these folks, so there's a little bit of technology there. But again, I can only influence so much when I'm dropping in, for a short time, and I can try to help them. But they want money, they want funds for things. But without me being there to oversee it, I don't trust that the funds will go to the right place. It's because stuff happens, like things get stolen, and it's tough. So I really admire what you're doing on that level, being able to go in and make these observations and make these changes. And I'm glad that the conversation is being had in, like you said, in the aid community. Like how do you kind of forgive yourself, and not feel that guilt, but still be able to provide for people.
And in your situation, do you feel like you can be able to find local organizations or government entities?
No, there's nothing. Yep. Yeah, it's so frustrating because as part of my tours, and I do tours all over the world, but as part of my tours, we always have kind of this giving back program because we feel like we're in a community. Let me support, through a donation, $500, $1,000, whatever it is, to help. We focus on women and children. So an orphanage, for example. And when I contact organizations in Papua New Guinea, there's either too much corruption and they won't go to these communities. It's like a forgotten land. It is, gosh, I could just cry thinking about it, just talking about it. It's like, it is really a forgotten land. It's just a forgotten country because they're just being screwed over by timber and mining industries and nobody gives a shit. I mean, that is the bottom line, is that nobody cares because there is so much money there and so few people, so few tourists go there that it's not being exposed. And I can only do so much by trying to educate people through photos and my stories about it. But
yeah, and that's a conversation that does need to be had. And I asked that question because that was my assumption of what the answer was going to be. Mm-hmm. And so that's, again, kind of where I came back with Connect 3 to be able to try and figure out a system that brought in the right stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And
by stakeholders, do you mean donors?
No, donors are a stakeholder, but I'm also talking at a local level. Who are the game players? Who and what agricultural associations are there? What kind of administrative boundaries do we have and how involved are they? Do we have local governing bodies? Do we have international aid projects already in the area? Do we have goods and services that are run at an international level, or is it at a local level? Being able to understand the markets, all these different players. What's the education system? Those are all different facets and stakeholders that have to come to the table in a certain way to be able to make sure that you are seeing the right kind of development at the right pace, but then also if you are drawing light on these stakeholders and the systems that are in place, it's going to become more obvious where the red flags are, where the break in the chains are, where that piece of corruption may lie that's making it so the community doesn't get clean water. Or it turns out that the teacher that's supposed to show up there 5 days a week is only showing up 2 days a week. And that's something then that you can kind of go back through this trail of stakeholders to be able to identify who's responsible for that. And that's where you can also target those organizations that are playing a role to help uplift a community. And so that's just why I asked that question for you, just because, it does need to be something, I would hope, that becomes more transparent within these places. Who do you go to? And how do you reach them? And there needs to be more cohesion and less competition, because at this point, the majority of the time, everybody's competing for funds. And that's what stirs this pot of corruption, just because they're going to take it for themselves. It's not going to disperse. But if we have a more open conversation and more of this feeling of collaboration, hopefully that will be where everybody gets a piece of the pie and there's more responsibility being taken by the necessary parties.
So you've started this in the one community in Peru. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me the name of the
Lucerna.
Lucerna.
Yeah.
Okay, Lucerna. And so the idea is that is kind of your first working test case, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's been successful?
Yeah. Success, I think, is always funny because in this situation, the things that don't work, the drawbacks, the frustrations, like all of those are so necessary to understand that is part of the success. And so we've had a lot of drawbacks, but it's been a learning process. And I think that at this point, we can say we are successful in the fact that we now have connected the local municipality to the community. And through the case study of Lucerna, we've been able to dig an independent waste pit for them that will last 2 years until the local municipality can help transport the waste out. But then we also have been able to develop a more concrete educational system within the community and water filtration systems. Another thing that was happening was the local municipality was just handing over a month's worth of chlorine tablets with no education on how to use them. And so the community would put all 31 tablets into their water tank at once and then not drink the water because it tasted
terrible.
horrible.
Yeah.
So those are all little things. But then also in presenting these findings to the local municipality, the municipality was like, wow, we don't even know what these communities are. And that is where I really took the jump into being like, okay, what is a framework of assessments that can be used for another organization or for the municipality to use independently to be able to understand what's happening in the community, what they need, and how to get it to them. And so then we are able to expand the project from Lucerna to 6 communities within the area. And then the local municipality is committed to expanding the project to all 64 of their communities.
Wow.
Through the framework.
So is this in one, you said municipality, is that like a district or like a province?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. And so there's 64 of these within it, and they're committed to getting this to expand.
And they had only visited maybe 7 or 8 or 9 of the communities of the 64. And so that's another thing where they just don't even have the means or know how to go and get the information that they need. So if I can provide that, then at least that is more of a tool and incentive for them to actually be able to get out there.
How are you providing it? By like literally yourself going into the community, or?
It started that way, but then over time it's trainings and being able to have such a concrete framework that it can stand alone.
But who's going into the community to take the data?
The municipality themselves. And so at this point, municipality members, there'll be a team and they will go into the communities. And so when I was doing the 6 communities, I took a team from the municipality to 3 of the communities to make sure that they were alongside with me and understood the different processes that you go through.
And then the idea is that they will continue to train other people to go out to other municipalities. Is that right?
Yeah.
Now I'm confusing myself with the terms.
No worries. Other municipalities. And we were able to formalize a contract and say that this was written into their 2 and 5 year plan to allocate resources to development, waste management, water, infrastructure. And so to make sure that those things were in there, it just adds a little bit more accountability.
And how long have you been in Lucerna?
4 years. I had an active project and I'll be returning this spring to do a checkup.
And then what kind of changes, or I'm hesitant to use the word improvements, but what kind of changes, progress maybe, have you seen in those 4 years?
An awareness is number one. People are now starting to think about what their garbage even is, how to define that, what waste is, but then also recognizing the fact...
Could you bring that to the rest of the United States?
Oh, and that's been a huge conversation that I've been having not only with myself, but with the peers, because this is not something that is just happening out there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is a major problem that we're facing here.
Yeah.
And so it's been interesting to come to realize that it's the same conversation. And there's actually power in that, because I think that we need to recognize where we really are at here and how to engage our privilege in a manner that starts honestly representing the kind of change that we want to see on a global level. And so what I do here is I test a lot of my frameworks and projects within school districts. And so with the waste auditing or waste management and water testing and different education curriculums. I really try and invite in different elementary school classes or after school groups to be able to explore those things here and start trying to get that conversation to be had with that generation right here at home. Because then also it doesn't feel like those problems halfway across the world are really that far away. All of a sudden, it's like, for example, I had an after-school group on Bainbridge Island with Ms. Mendoza, my former third grade teacher, use the bottle caps that I brought home from Ethiopia to make earrings and baby toys, and to start trying to really define what waste was, because those bottle caps were waste. But now, all of a sudden, I brought them home and I was like, hey guys, I think these could be cool. I am not a believer that these are waste. What do you think? They're like, no, why don't we make earrings? Why don't we make baby toys? And through this and through selling them, they've been able to send 4 kids to school.
In Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's all connection and it's all perspective. So I agree.
Well, we're really fortunate here in the Pacific Northwest and the Seattle area that we have separate recycle bottles. Bottle and paper goes in one, and then compost and yard waste goes in another, and garbage goes in another. And, supposedly you get fined if you don't properly separate it out. But I'm shocked when I go to other parts of the country and I've got, my recycle, and I say, where does this go? Oh, just put it in the garbage. And I'm like,
it's mind-boggling.
You guys don't have recycling? I can't believe it. Yeah, it's crazy.
The founder of the orphanage, she lives in Sandpoint, Idaho, and they don't have recycling. And so it's just like, what? Like, we're spending so much time, over in Soto, Ethiopia, developing a self-sustaining village. And we have dedicated ourselves to that. And yet we come home and it's just like running up against a brick wall.
Yeah. We're just so uneducated about it. I know, just a slight diversion, because I'm trying to get this gal on the podcast who is, I don't actually know her title for it, but I know she's very involved in the making of a new documentary out called The Story of Plastic. And it's all about, I know a couple of these folks who have been working on the film, and it's all about, the big garbage dumps that are in the ocean and, what's happening with plastic. And I've seen a plastic ocean, I think it's called, and I've mentioned it numerous times on the podcast, that I could only watch about the first 20 minutes of this film, and it just made me sick to my stomach. But it changed me so much, and it changed our buying decisions here in our house, with my husband, what kind of single use choices that we make or don't make, based on that. But it's an education on our part, it's like we're just such a throwaway society. It's incredibly sad.
It is. And to be able to recognize that and then also take a look at what kind of structures we have in place controlling the waste management, that's been fascinating to see areas that have very little waste management structure on a formal level. But then the informal recycling that happens is awesome. You have the largest informal sector of laborers be waste pickers, for example, in Ethiopia. And there's pros and cons to that, for sure. Large health hazards being in landfills for large periods of time. But at the same time, they have this booming informal economy around reusing their own waste. And it's done completely on their own. And then you also see, for example, at the orphanage, when I did the waste audit, I was shocked. I was like, how do we not have any of the plastic bottles or formula cans from all the baby food? Like, I see you guys feeding it to the babies. Where does it go? And they were all buying and selling the bottles and cans themselves. And so to know that that can happen just naturally, it's a little confusing, I think, sometimes coming home and recognizing that we have such big structures for this to happen. And yet, I don't know if it becomes too complicated on an administrative level to be able to let there be some freedom of that market happen with recycled goods and the buying and trading within just the basic materials that we use every day. I think it's a larger conversation to be had because I don't think that consumerism is necessarily going to slow down. I would like to think that maybe I would.
Yeah. I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but it just reminded me that I go to an event. Most years I go usually once a year. It happens twice a year. It's called Outdoor Retailer. And it's a huge trade show where companies in the outdoor space come and show off their latest gear. So it's everything from clothes to shoes to backpacking gear and kayaks and just like food. It's everything. And when I went this past year, it might have been June when I went, and the big theme was recycled products. So everybody, like, it's so funny because you go and it's always marketing people that I'm meeting with, the marketing people, and they always have a story to tell. And so everyone's story this year was recycled. And at one, I was like, okay, show me what you got that's recycled. But, on the other hand, it's great. And you know what? I'm wearing underwear right now from a company called Go Light. And they actually use like recycled bottles in all of their clothes and materials, that maybe not all of them. I think they use them in all of them, but they're not all 100% recycled.
Okay. It's called Go Light?
Go Light. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's GOLITE.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, but these companies are doing this now. They're taking products and making them into recycled clothes. And I know that there's a downside to that too. I think that there's some question about whether that stuff is then kind of spitting out into the wash, when you wash the clothes, if it's got those micro balls or the microplastics. But so I'm not sure about that, but I think we're headed in the right direction in terms of that because everybody's talking about it, and it is not going to be a trend. It is the thing.
Well, totally. And let's just break it back down to the simplistics of materials. And I think that we got super excited with the whole boom of technology and different synthetic materials that can be made. But at the end of the day, one of our projects that we're working on right now is compostable diapers. And it's well, duh, that would be so much easier to manage. At this point, synthetic diapers take over 500 years to decompose. And they're currently usually just being either thrown in the landfill or behind a family's house, and that accumulates and ends up being
behind a family's house.
No, in these remote communities.
Yeah, I was like, wait a minute, what? Yeah.
And
oh my God, it's that's so just heartbreaking.
Risk of disease outbreak from those is just nuts. And so it's there are super organic materials that can be used to be able to just make an absorbent diaper that can be fully broken down. Mm-hmm. And let's not have it be some kind of niche market that gets it. Why not try and make it accessible to everybody? And in the long run would be cheaper to make. And these communities could potentially make them themselves. So there are some companies out there that are making compostable diapers. A lot of the time they're 95% compostable because they use a synthetic Velcro strap or something in there. So they can't actually be broken down. But that's just an example where it's yes, I agree. It's been great for our economy, science, efficiency on some levels to have so many of these different synthetic materials out there. But also at the same time, it's totally okay to take a step back down to our roots and just be let's look at how to make this with the materials that we have.
Yeah. There was a gal that I had on the podcast, Angel Murdoch. She's if I get this right, she's a nurse in the Salt Lake City area, and she goes to Nepal. She goes on these big, long treks, 20, 30-day treks to these really remote villages in Nepal, talking about healthcare, women's healthcare specifically, and providing either biodegradable or reusable pads for menstruating women.
That's amazing.
Yeah, isn't that great? Mm-hmm. That's right along those, right along that. It's so funny how sometimes in other countries they are they kind of are ahead of us,
right?
Because we have fallen back on ease of use, with Velcro, like you said. And they're advanced in terms of kind of skipping the steps of not going through manufactured synthetic products.
Exactly.
So, wow. Well, all of that is completely amazing. So you have this program going in Peru in a number of communities, and then you actually jumped over to Ethiopia and you've started it there as well. In addition to you working with if I have this correct, in addition to you working with the orphanage, you are also implementing Connect 3 in this philosophy and this program in Ethiopia. Is that right?
Right. So it was a very serendipitous connection between Connect 3 and the orphanage. And that happened 2 years ago now. I made my first trip over to Ethiopia, actually a connection through the horse world. And so the founder of the orphanage started the orphanage with her partner at the World Cup level, her horse, SF Uriati, and so thus the name Uriati's Village. And so I ride horses myself, and I had some extra time before classes started, before
horse classes or before UW classes?
UW classes.
Okay.
Yes, good clarification. And I had just come home from Peru, and I was like, I have 4 weeks. I might go down to California, work at this horse show, and then head back to class at UW. And it was there that Jennifer and I, the founder of the orphanage, ran into each other again. And she had heard of my work in Peru and essentially asked me there on the spot over lunch if I would like to jump on a plane in 5 days and go to Ethiopia with her. So I ended up leaving straight from the horse show, and that was my first trip to Ethiopia.
Wow.
And the start of our second case study through this orphanage. And I worked just on that case study for about 1.5 years. So just doing the education, waste, and water systems for the orphanage. And in that time, a student from the Technical University of Munich reached out to me and asked if he could do his master thesis looking at water systems. And so...
With your help?
With my help, through Connect 3. And so he ended up jumping on board and starting his thesis at the orphanage as well. And that really solidified a case study in the sense that not only were we going to be working with the orphanage, but then we were going to be scaling it. And so we then had the means to be able to reach out to the watershed and then to the city limits through this whole academic level of partnership with the local university. And so that kind of gave us a leg up. And in that process, I was spending so much time there that Jennifer, this last December, asked if I would come on full time for the orphanage as the programs manager. So that's how that ended up falling into place. And it's been an incredible blessing. It is just amazing to be able to explore so many of the social dynamics. I joke that I've dedicated myself to these waste and water and education systems and science. But at the same time, I think what all of this work has really given me is so much more of a perspective on just basic connection and communication. And so to be able to now explore that on a broader level with the orphanage and have a tangible outlet of really trying to develop progressive systems and frameworks for these children to grow up in family-style living and have the resources that they need to be able to step out into society in a healthy manner when they're ready.
What is it that you're doing from here for the village in Ethiopia and the orphanage? Like exactly what is the work?
What is the work? It is very diverse, but on a more simplistic level, I run all the social media. I do all the correspondence between our donors, sponsors, and the local either children or management team there. So each one of our children are sponsored by someone either here in the US or in Canada or in Europe. And so we have 110 children managing all that, managing the budget. And I also look for different connections to be able to bring teams in to do local trainings. And so I help facilitate medical teams or dental teams or education teams and have those people be able to have a concrete framework in place to be able to go and train the local people to be able to take the step back. Because at this point, the orphanage is run by Jennifer Crooks, who lives in Sandpoint, Idaho. I'm the only other U.S. employee, and then we have, I think, around 70 local Ethiopian employees at this point.
Wow. Not all for the orphanage.
All for the orphanage.
That's almost like, that's not quite a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's like a 1 person to 0.75 kids, right? You said 110 kids or something?
We have 110 kids. We have around 45 nannies. And so at that level, So
each is responsible for a few kids.
Okay. A handful of kids. But then you have nurses on hand, you have social workers, you have a management team, you have a permaculturist, you have landscapers, you have security guards,
Wow.
I mean, it accumulates pretty quick to be able to have the necessary manpower to really run it.
Where does the major funding come for the orphanage?
The horse world. It's been incredible.
No kidding.
And that's actually been something that's been so cool to watch because, I mean, talk about a world where there's things that I absolutely love but also struggle with. I grew up, we raised all our own horses, broke them. They were born at our house. And so I've had a very intimate relationship with developing horses and what that means. And at this point, I think it's become a very privileged sport. And not a whole lot of people see a whole lot other than that world within it. And so to have a woman who was competing at the very top level, found success.
And this is Jennifer.
This is Jennifer. Make such an unrelatable world relatable to these people has just been incredible. And the backing and support and dedication is what made this project possible.
Mm-hmm. So to go back to the beginning of our conversation where you said, you know, what you're finding is that a lot of times organizations are funded by more privileged people. It's like kind of from that experience, like you have that experience from the horse world, is that people who are riding horses generally and who own horses generally have some money. And so tapping into that as kind of a resource has been greatly helpful to you. Like having that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the horses have funded the orphanage. And I think that at this point, it's also been really fun to see that we're now at a place with the different programs in science and permaculture and water systems that we can also tap into more of the grant area. And so it's not just a social initiative. We really have some traction at this point trying to bring in a diverse range of funds, because also you do worry about longevity of funding. You don't ever want to have all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Right.
And especially when you're thinking about trying to support a kid for 18 years.
How much does it cost for 1 year?
For 1 year, for a child under 2, it's $175. For a child over 2, it's $240 per month.
Oh, so there's quite a big jump.
So, sorry, excuse me. Yeah, I put that in per month because all our sponsorships are per month.
Okay.
And then...
But you said the first one was a year. When they're under 2, it's $170 a year?
No, sorry, per month.
Oh, it is a month.
Okay. So our sponsorship programs are done per month. You can support a child, and it's $175 for a child under 2, and then over 2, it's $240.
Got it.
And then you sign up for a year of that.
I understand. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. And so that just allows the kid to have all the basic needs met, but then also we pay for school for them and
probably uniforms, and,
exactly,
supplies,
food, all that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's all just incredibly amazing. I do want to go back in time right now and just talk about how you got here, but is there anything else that you would want to add to the topic? And we can always come back to it. It's totally fine. But anything that you'd want to add kind of to the topic of Connect 3 and the work in Peru and Ethiopia? Or do you think we've covered that?
I think we've covered all of it. I mean, it's just so funny. Each conversation about it changes a bit. And I think that there's beauty in that. You have to allow the fluidity with the project and to know that, yes, you hold true to your mission and vision, but at the same time, it's never static. And so, I mean, just to that, I think we've covered all the main topics that I have really advocated for the last 5 years. And so it's all a personal journey, but at the same time, it's also making sure that not only am I helping or advocating for these communities and aren't necessarily heard, but also trying to bring it back home and make it so it's relatable to my peers and make it so other people around me can find what sparks them or what is that thing that makes it so it's like, oh, well, if I can just do this, then I see the long-term effects of it, or just ignite that passion around something or that connection to the world around you. I guess really that's what it comes down to, is I hope that through this work, it makes it so there's a greater connection to the world around us.
Are there any books that you would recommend people read, either about nonprofits or working with indigenous cultures? Anything that you read through the process that wasn't a textbook that might resonate with people?
Yes. It's a number, 40 something. It's Mr. Buffett's book.
Warren Buffett?
Warren Buffett. I don't know if you can look that up. But I thought it was just really interesting because he was so honest about his projects. And he was like, look, I've tried this a lot of times. Here's what worked and here's what didn't work. And it goes through each one of those different projects. 40 chances.
40 chances, yeah.
Finding hope in a hungry world. I thought that was fascinating. I also absolutely loved, and I do think it shaped how I have approached my work. And it sounds kind of funny, but Shantaram, being able to read that book and really dissect personal impact and...
Which takes place in a slum in Mumbai, India.
Exactly. And navigating that personal journey, being able to know that there's going to be societal structures in place that you're going to have to push against for the greater good, or to know where the moral and ethical balance of things lie. I think that was a book that really started to shape the way I approached the situations that I was presented.
I would never have thought of that, but it makes sense. It's been a number of years since I've read that, but it is a fantastic book and just brings a whole new perspective on what it's like to be, in the slums, of course, in India, but just kind of in a marginalized community where they don't have water. They don't have clean water. No. They don't have access to basic needs, to toilets, to healthcare. Yeah.
And the connection that I made, which may be completely out of left field, but it is what sparked this thought process, was here was this guy who was working in the black market. I won't ruin the book. But through working in the black market, he was able to pay for medicine and medical supplies for the slums. And I was like, wow, there's something where he knew that working in the black market was probably not great, but he also had to work within the structure that was present, the system that was present, to be able to start making the change that he needed to make, and was somewhat trying to oppose. Like, he recognized that the corruption in the black market definitely spurred a lot of the discrepancies in wealth. And when you have discrepancies in wealth, you have greater numbers of slums. And so for him, it was like, yes, I'm working within this system that is actually probably causing a lot of the problems that I'm seeing, but I know that I can get the resources I need to be able to then make that impact. And I then took that and extrapolated it. But for me, it's been able to recognize that I have to work within this structure and system of capitalism, of strict competition within academia, of white male privilege. Like being a 23-year-old blonde white girl has not necessarily been the easiest path. And to recognize that I can't just say no to that all and push against all of it. I have to be able to navigate and have the conversations and be able to make those moral, ethical decisions that are safe for me, but also with the longevity of the project in mind. And so I do shape the people who are closest to this project and the board with that thought in mind. I'm incredibly grateful for the support that I have, and they are mostly older males. And I, have come to the realization that not only do they provide amazing input, but also they're able to make it more accepted and the voice to be heard of the organization in different audiences that I alone would not be able to do.
Have you read Savages?
No.
Oh my God.
Oh, I see it right over there.
I know. I'm going to just grab it. The author is Joe Kane, and look at all the places that I've marked. I've got all these little
That's a sign of a good book.
Posted notes in there. I don't know the last time I've ever done it it's a nonfiction book, but usually it's like a how-to book. I've got it all marked up and stuff, like a health book or something, but this is just an incredible story of the Warani Indians in Ecuador. And it's unbelievable. This was such a life changer for me.
Well, there's also another book called Truth and What Remains, and that's an incredible book. And that one, let me just pull it up real quick.
Tracy Kidder.
Yes. Have you read this?
No, but I've read Mountains. What is it? Just above
Mountains Beyond Mountains.
Yeah, about his time in Haiti.
So, his experience, I won't go into detail fully. But what this book really presented to me was that discussion within yourself that you have with leaving your roots, going other places, but then how do you connect that back home and how do you help the community that you came from? And so I think that all of that is a discussion that needs to be had as well when you're doing this kind of work, because I know for me, that's part of the reason why I couldn't commit to living in Peru. I have roots and I honor those roots, and to make sure that I also come back home is something that's really important to me.
Yeah. Well, it's great that you know that about yourself, that you, like you said, you honor that and you know about it. So that's great. Yeah. Okay. So great reading.
I love books. I wish I thought about that a little bit more, just because I read a lot, and I think it's such a valuable way to expand your horizons and to just gain different perspectives. And it's also very calming to me. But no, I would be happy to give more recommendations.
Well, if you think of more, I'll just add them to the show notes at a later time. So that's no problem.
Because there's so many.
So that's actually a really good place to pivot here, because I have a question about that. I've had several book authors that I've spoken with on the podcast, and it just seems like in the last couple of months too, I've spoken to a couple of them, and there were two recently that told me, book sales are up, more people are reading books than ever before. And I was like, really? That's fascinating to me, because it just seems like we are such a quick hit culture that we're looking at social media and we're not diving into things. And you mentioned it, I alluded to it earlier. And then you mentioned it, that you're 23. For one, I just want to honor that right there, that, oh my God, I have no idea how, I don't even want to mention what I was like at 23, so big kudos to you for what you have done and what you've brought to the table and what's going on in your mind, just how you've been able to see the world, amazing stuff, and just big props to you for that. But then also, so here you are, a 23-year-old millennial. I think you're on the cusp of that, right? I was just looking that up before. I'm like, what's the age of millennials? Yeah. So you're just on the edge of millennials, where most people aren't reading these days. Most young people aren't reading these days. So what makes you different, that you're not just scrolling through social media all day long and then finding, like the rest of us, that 30, 45 minutes has disappeared, and your intention was to sit down and read that book, but you didn't get to it?
I think that going and traveling and being alone really shaped a lot of it. I mean, I think since I was a kid, I didn't relate to my peers very well.
Did you relate to adults?
I related to adults more, but then for me, it's just, I think there's so many distractions, and it validated this idea that so few people honestly connect with each other. Once I went to these places where we had no technology, life slowed down. And when you were present with a person, you were present with a person. And I think I had a lot of anxiety as a child because of this feeling of lack of connection, or just misunderstanding of why there was so much stress and so much energy going on. And I think that technology definitely aids in that stress and distraction that we have. And then when we go to relate with each other or connect with each other, we're not really always heard. We're just not present. And that's been something that I've really tried to explore and understand further, because I always found so much peace as a kid with my horse, with nature, just being outside. And then I was like, why is it that when I'm outside with someone else, it's so much nicer?
You grew up on Bainbridge,
yeah.
Is that right? So you were spending a lot of time outside on Bainbridge, just mainly with the horses, but also probably hiking and adventuring out.
Hiking, and I played every and all sports. So it wasn't, yes, I spent a lot of time hiking, but not, I would say not out of the norm. As a family, we would go here and there, and in the summer we would go on road trips, and national parks would be a staple of that.
Well, out of the norm maybe for this area, but I grew up in New Jersey, and we did road trips, but did we go to parks? Not really. I mean, there was a park, not too far from where we live, but it was not my parents go hiking? No way. Like that is just not part of it.
That's such a great point though, because we live in a bubble here in terms of access to the natural world.
Yeah. So for me, it's like I'm used to being like, of course I like to be outside, but it's really more in my more recent history that I've been spending more time outdoors. Like I am just perfectly happy to kind of hang out inside.
Yeah.
Where the temperature is controlled. And here, like you never know what's going to happen outside.
Right. You never know.
Yeah.
But anyway, getting back to the social media and technology, I think what I have just come to the conclusion of, and I use social media, and that's been something that's been just like, I don't know if I should, I don't know if I shouldn't, I don't know what it means. But at the same time, I've gained so many valuable connections through social media for my organization, for the orphanage, that at this point, I think I just have to accept the fact that it can be used as a tool. But then it's so bizarre to recognize that feeling of just like emptiness when you feel like you need to be validated by your followers, by the likes, by the messages, by the attention you're getting through social media. Because I think to me, that was the realization of being like, that's not what I want a connection with a person to be.
And you recognize that as emptiness.
Totally. Emptiness in a relationship, emptiness in a connection or that relatability to another person. And I think that really only came to me after spending extended periods of time with no technology and recognizing what it really meant to be present with another person.
I find it really interesting that the words you're using around that, because I've been on, like I've done this trek in Bhutan. It's a 25-day trek. So you're trekking in the Himalayas in Bhutan at 18,000 feet, and there's like barely a cell connection. Like for emergency use for my guides, I have no cell connection. I have no connection to the outside world unless there's an emergency. Then we have like a special satellite thing that we could press and send off an emergency text message. And it's always those times when I am so repulsed by social media, and I just think, oh, what? This is life. This is experience. Like you said, connection to the outdoor world, connection to other people. Really just being concerned about putting one foot in front of the other because there are dire consequences if you misstep.
Totally.
In some cases. And, it always, I do fall back to it. I do fall back to social media because it's part of my business, but I kind of would like nothing more than to not be part of it.
Just say bye to it. Totally.
Yeah. But that feeling of, I never thought of it as like a emptiness, like when you come back to it or you fall back into it, but that you feel full when you're doing something else that you're consumed by, that's much healthier for you. And
I think that what made me come to that feeling, or the definition of that feeling more, was because I have recognized that I've chosen a pretty independent path, and I don't have coworkers that I can relate to necessarily. It's definitely a little strange to relate to my peers sometimes, as I'm here, there, everywhere. They don't really know what I do. I work remotely, but then all of a sudden I'm in Ethiopia, or I'm in Sandpoint, Idaho, or I go to a World Cup qualifier for horseback riding for a fundraiser. I get that it doesn't always connect from the outside. And to then know that there's this world of social media that's painting a picture and that other people see it. And that's how the majority of people stay connected to me. But then there's that realization that they don't know me. They haven't had a conversation with me in 3 months. And that's where that feeling of emptiness or loneliness came, because it's like, wow, I have so many people supporting me, but at the same time, like, where's that human to human connection? I am totally okay with having quality over quantity, but at the same time, I think it's a very strange dynamic sometimes that we see where it's like, you have this huge social media community, which is amazing. And like I said, can be used as a tool, but then also like there is a person behind that. And, like those feelings of craving one-on-one interaction with someone, or just that simple understanding of being like, yep, I'm 23 still, there's still stuff that I have to go through that every other 23-year-old has to go through.
When you post on social media, do you post all of those facets? Do you post your trip to Ethiopia? Do you post, you're going to the World Cup horse championships? Do you post a little bit of everything, life on Bainbridge, or do you keep it to kind of one theme?
I try and post a little bit of everything, but it definitely mostly is just organization or nonprofit orphanage type of work. But then I think there's moments where I try and include social aspects or the fact that like I have a little bit of a life outside of just that and make me as a human a little bit more relatable than just having it be the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to post from various parts of my life because we are multifaceted, right? And I think I wonder if it's confusing to some people because they might say, wait, I know Beth from the running world and now she's like posting this thing from Papua New Guinea or she's going to Ireland. Like,
how did she end up there?
Yeah, I don't get it, but I think the people who do know me know like, oh, they've seen this, evolving human, into different realms. So I think there is that.
Well, yeah. It's an ecosystem. That's what I just keep coming back to. Like our bodies, ourselves, our personalities, all of that is so multifaceted. And so to just accept that life isn't always so linear.
Right. Absolutely. So you mentioned a couple of times like nature is calming for you, and you mentioned something else that had kind of this calming effect for
reading.
You. But yeah, reading did.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you need to be calmed down? Like, do you have kind of a natural propensity towards stress that has has influenced you thinking like, okay, I have to find ways to kind of get past this? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. And I try not to say stress per se, but I think that something that I run into is that feeling of like, I just can't turn my brain off. There's so much. And that feeling of just being so completely overwhelmed. Because there's moments of that for sure. And like, what have I gotten myself into?
Overwhelmed because you have such a long task list or because you have so many ideas of what you would like to do or a combination?
All of the above. I think it's all of it.
Have you always been like that?
Yeah.
So when you were a kid, you were like that?
Well, and I have such a fierce sense of curiosity. And so it's like always been a question asker, always trying to figure out what's going on around me. Something that I have come to recognize with myself is I just am very aware and perceptive of the people around me and the energies around me. So I think that as I've gotten older, it's been easier to create those boundaries. But when other people are super stressed or concerned or really excited, like I feed off of that so intensely. And so to be able to also set up those personal boundaries has helped. But to be able to find those moments of clarity and peace, I have turned always to the natural world. For me, horseback riding is such a beautiful space to be able to do that. First of all, there's no faking what kind of mood you're in when you're on your horse. But then you have to be so present and you can't be worried about what's going on that day. You can't even be worried about the last fence you jumped. You got to be in that moment with your horse, not concerned about the future. And so that's really taught me that I am where I am and I need to be in that moment. That's something that I continuously have to work on. I love running. I love hiking and rock climbing. Rock climbing actually is one of the more similar spaces to horseback riding in that you have to be so in your zone and so in
it's
that
life
moment.
Or death.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it's been interesting because it's like a lot of people will tell me you put yourself in very stressful situations to de-stress. And I never really thought about that. But then I was like, yeah, like going and climbing Mount Rainier was one of the most beautiful, peaceful experiences I've had to date. Going on rock climbs.
And you just did that this summer, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's not necessarily, maybe to some people it is. And so maybe, I don't know if you'll agree with me or not, but I don't see that like hiking Mount Rainier as a stressful situation.
Nor do I.
Right. And so if you're prepared for it, it takes the stress out of it. And I think like, yes, thinking about rock climbing stresses me out, but I would think for the person who enjoys it and who wants to pursue it, that it doesn't necessarily need to be a stressful situation.
Right. And as long as you are aware and safe and, like I think, my dad is always like, don't do something stupid to make it so you can't do anything else cool in the future. Just be conscious of the choices that you make and the safety and boundaries that are involved with that. So like for you thinking about rock climbing, being stressed out by that, I would assume just maybe by the exposure of it or just the fear that might be associated with climbing. But yeah, for me, it's a safe space because I trust the people I'm doing it with. I trust my equipment. I double check, so then it ends up being a space where I can just let go. Yeah. And yoga, I try and do yoga a lot. My body's
very safe,
very safe, very calming.
Yeah.
Actually was one of the most difficult things for me to get into because I had to just stop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't, like yoga is supposed to be like meditative and calming, but most classes are like an hour and a half. And the thought of that is really stressful for me.
Totally.
It's like, I don't want to go in for an hour and a half.
I don't have an hour and a half.
No, I do a 30-minute yoga practice and it's great. I've got a video and I just watch that and just boom, boom, go through it. And it's great. So the calming thing. And now I want to backtrack a bit. So grew up on Bainbridge. You went to the UW, but somewhere in there, you have a life that has, informed who you are and made you this person with an active brain. I don't want to say overactive because who's to say, but you've got this active brain with all sorts of ideas and kind of big picture thinking. Where did that come from? I think you're pretty unique. I'll just say it that way. Because like I said before, at 23, I was not in the place where you are. I was out dancing at bars and staying out too late and, and thinking about how I was going to save money to go on my next trip. And that was my focus. I wasn't necessarily thinking about how could I start a nonprofit and how can I help other people and how can I kind of bring all this together and take a winter quarter and live in another country while still going to university. So what do you think kind of formed and shaped you into this person who can think with such compassion and in those really big picture thoughts?
To that, it's still something that I try and connect the dots backwards on. I grew up, and I think it is an interesting facet just because it's such a different place than I am in now. And if you were to talk to my parents, they were like, there's no way I would have envisioned this. Because I had extreme anxiety as a kid. Like second grade, I had to be homeschooled because I want to go to school. Like just a lot of turmoil.
How long were you homeschooled?
For less than a year. It didn't go very well. I was not stimulated enough. But I was put on different medication.
I was going to say that sounds like something that they would like put you on what is it, Adderall? Is it or like the ADD, ADHD medication?
But essentially it just made me go numb. Freaked me out, freaked my parents out, so that didn't last very long. And I think in hindsight, I was feeling the tension within my family. My family went through a divorce. So my anxiety hit mostly in second grade.
Yeah.
And I was feeling the tension among my family members.
Yeah.
And then my mom and dad got a divorce my seventh grade year.
Oh, in seventh grade. Okay.
Yep. So so I would say that was just a period of tension within the family.
So you identified that as like you were probably feeling the stress.
Exactly.
And then your parents stayed together, but you probably were feeling that, like the fighting or whatever was going on.
Totally. And it just like it wasn't vocalized and no one ever had a conversation about it. So I think in some ways I thought I was just going crazy because I felt this tension.
Because you're a perceptive person. Mm-hmm.
And so that I think started to be where I ended up really trying to analyze my own perspective and feelings and emotions because I was starting to feel these things that no one was vocalizing, and not understanding that led to the anxiety, but then also feeling somewhat stuck within that. And then I had an amazing third grade teacher, Ms. Mendoza, and she just gave me a job and a purpose. Like she told me the first day of school, you better show up because you're going to be collecting everybody's flowers that they brought. And you have to make sure that every one of the students has theirs and is checked in. And like that was my job. That was it. And all of a sudden I was there. And
were you like kind of special in the class, or did she give everybody jobs? Like, did she identify you like, oh, here's a way that I can...
I'm pretty sure the school district put me in her class specifically because of what happened in second grade. And she's known as a really amazing teacher. And so...
And meaning, so sorry to interrupt.
Worries.
So what happened in second grade, meaning you basically almost dropped out of school. You wanted to be homeschooled
Yeah.
because you were stressed out. And they thought, okay, this is a good placement
Here's
for
a
her.
teacher. Let's give it a shot. And so it was a special situation, but she never made me feel ostracized by any means. Instead, it was just this moment of empowerment. And all of a sudden, I could own a facet of my life. After so long of feeling out of control or just without a voice in some of the aspects of my life, it sounds silly, but it was just like, okay, here's my space. And I can have purpose and help other people and be independent and not defined by whatever it may be that's going on at home, and no one even knows about it. Because I also all of a sudden felt this feeling of embarrassment. Like, what if people found out that I had an anxiety? What if people found out that I was going through this whole thing of maybe going to homeschool? Like it was so confusing on so many different levels. And so I think that was a moment of just being like, here we go, starting fresh. She did not have or show any difference of treatment towards me because of those things. And then she also had a very unique curriculum. And in her world, we had projects every quarter, essentially, so 3 throughout the school year, that introduced us to a different culture. And so that...
What was the class?
It was just 3rd grade. Like...
Oh, because in 3rd grade at that point,
it was my homeroom.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
wow,
that was
what
amazing.
A forward-thinking, amazing woman.
Oh, she's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And the thing that really stuck with me with that one was our calendar project, where we made calendars, sold them, and then used those proceeds to be able to build a school in our sister island of Ometepe, Nicaragua. And so that was where I was like, okay, like I can do this here, and that's going to go and do something there. And I'm in 3rd grade, so I can do anything. Mm-hmm. And to just have that was really, really unique. And it was through that whole process that I started trying to explore what was outside of my bubble. Because not only did I feel like I was able to make impact, but then I got this taste of the world around me. And I was like, it is so much bigger than my little bubble on Bainbridge Island, and I want to know more about it. And I also want to start exploring myself. Because now all of a sudden being able to independently define myself made it so I recognized I was my own entity. And there was different facets to me that I didn't know about. And so how can I put myself in situations and expose different layers of myself and be able to push that bubble and then become more comfortable with all those facets of me? Because I think that where anxiety comes from is this feeling of the unknown, feeling out of control, feelings of doubt. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to try and start exploring each one of those. And putting myself in uncomfortable situations seems to be the best way to do it. So let's try and broaden my horizons. And that was difficult. It was also difficult because I, again, am a person that I think can very easily feel a real connection versus a not real connection with people. And growing up, that can be kind of funny just because as a kid, I don't think you necessarily are choosing your friends. You end up being friends with whoever's closest to you or has
who's
a
in your
cool
class
bike or likes
who's
to
in
play
your
on
neighborhood.
Play on the monkey bars. And so I just didn't identify with that. And I will never forget a conversation later in high school where I had a good group of friends. Like I played a lot of sports and that gave me a community. But at the same time, I wasn't super socially active just because I didn't relate to the people around me. And my parents were like, are you antisocial? And I was like, no, first of all, I just don't have that much time. I'm playing all these sports. And through the divorce, my outlet was sports and academia. So that was my comfortable space. And also, I just never felt the need to be able to put so much energy into a connection or a friendship that I knew was somewhat superficial.
Yeah. So you're terrible at small talk at cocktail parties.
Oh, awful. Everybody's like, why did you just dive to that? And all of a sudden we're going through what makes you you or your experiences that have ended up being more of the formative ones in your life. Because I just think it's interesting. I'd rather know that aspect. But there's a balance.
Mm-hmm. So you're not afraid to, at a cocktail party, to dive into something, just to ask someone, not like, oh, where do you live? Terrible weather today kind of thing. You want to know, you do want to do a deeper dive.
Yeah, I think you have to ease into a little bit. I hope that I've become a little bit more graceful in that.
Yeah, you're that much self-aware.
Yeah. But then it really was at the University of Washington where I found my people. And I think that's where I then started to really take that leap and be like, okay, this is it. I was able to network and find these connections that led me down the path of starting the independent research project. I think I was not only lucky, but aware of the opportunities that were present and in a place where I wasn't afraid to say yes and just go for it. I think in some ways it's been so easy to do all of this because I figure at this point in my life, it's a pretty risk-free period of time. The worst thing that a person can say to me is no, and I go a different direction. I'm not tied down to a family or a place or different responsibilities other than the ones that I choose in my life at this point. And
do you have siblings?
I do. An older brother, 6 years older. Tanner.
6 years older.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's part of the reason why you relate better to adults than you do? Well, you are an adult, but older people rather than like your peers when you were growing up, just because the influence that you had was an older sibling?
My brother was not super present, especially through the divorce. And so I would not say that had a huge influence. I think I was always comfortable with them and if they were around, but I went to a pretty independent place through all of that. And the people that I did communicate to about what was happening were adults or just my mom and dad. Some of my friends didn't even know my parents went through a divorce because I didn't feel like that was something that others needed to know necessarily, or the family situation that came out of it.
Did both of your parents stay on Bainbridge?
They did for a bit, and both of them went through not great relationships right outside of the divorce, and then for financial reasons, we actually all lived back together for a period of time, and then sold our family home. And that was happening my senior year of high school through my freshman year of college. And that was a very difficult situation, to say the least.
Selling it or living in the same home together?
All of it. I think that we had to come to terms with what the situation was. We had to finally accept the fact that my parents had got a divorce. These were the reasons why they got a divorce. We were not in the financial situation that everybody thought we were in.
That happens to a lot of people these days.
It does.
I know so many who stay together in a home because they don't have any other financial options.
Exactly. And then to be able to let go of that property, it was a big shift and turning of a page. Mm-hmm. And I think it ended up providing a lot of healing. My mom and I were at wit's end, and through that whole thing, we both recognized that we never wanted to lose each other. And at this point, she is like one of my best friends, and we're so deeply connected, but there's also just that blatant honesty that I don't think we would have ever been able to find if we didn't go through it. My dad's my rock, always will be my rock. And my brother's become much more open to everything because of having to come back home for a bit.
Mm-hmm. Is he still in this area?
He actually just got engaged. So he proposed to his girlfriend in September, and they just moved to Denver. So he just flew the coop, but super happy for him. But I think that was all just really formative. Again, it ended up being something that made me look at communication skills, boundaries, relationships.
So you were observing all of this and you're saying, nope, don't want to be that way. Don't want to be that way. I can navigate doing this particular thing. I can kind of understand or observe people and know how I want to be or what works for me in terms of a calming effect or a stressful effect on yourself. Huh.
And that's a lot of what was happening when I made my first trip to Peru. And I think it finally was that point of just being like, I'm getting away. and this is how I'm going to do it. So I think in some ways, Peru and this work was an outlet. And I know that just from previous experience where academia was always a safe place for me. And so I think it could be that this work and keeping my brain so active and trying to figure out the puzzle of this all, because yes, it's helping and it's coming from compassion, but also it's one giant puzzle. And I think that's what compels me most of all, because I'm so determined to be able to find those puzzle pieces that make it so it clicks. And that's so multifaceted. And that comes from a personal journey as well as observing the world around you and having a deep understanding of the science and the academia that builds that foundation for the project. Mm-hmm. So I don't think any of it is exclusive. I think it all just ends up building on it, but it's a puzzle. And I think that is what drives me.
I want to try to phrase this in a very broad strokes way. And I'm going to ask your observation about something. And I don't it doesn't have to be your friends that we're talking about here, but just like kind of across the board, because I mentioned earlier, millennials, of which you are part of. Do you see like a problem with millennials these days? And because, and this isn't, I don't even think that this is necessarily from my personal perspective, because I don't have a lot of experience with millennials. I have 2 nieces and 2 nephews who are in that age range. And of course, they're stellar human beings, right? So they don't fall into this. But, I think that there's a sense, from what I hear people say, there's a sense of loss of like they don't know who they are. They have trouble getting jobs just because there's not availability for work for them. They are brought up in a culture where in general we have become more disconnected. They and you were brought up in this environment of being disconnected, thinking you're connected because you've got your phone and you've got your iPad and you've got access to everything and everyone. You have explained how you're different in that way. But do you see that as a bigger problem kind of in general with millennials? Or is that just is that a falsehood that I just happen to be hearing because that's an experience of some adults with millennials?
No, I think that it's a very true observation. And what I've noticed, and I think this is totally fine to talk about with my friends who are closest to me, is that they rarely have the conversations of discomfort with any of their other friends. I think, let me put that in a different manner. At this point, everything that we see shows this very defined path that we're supposed to be on. Go to college, graduate, start your job. You have social media to tell you who your friends are supposed to be, what you're supposed to be doing on the weekend, what it means to go and have fun, who it means to be yourself. And I think that there's a lot of dishonesty with ourselves, with accepting the fact that we aren't who everybody portrays us to be. We are who we are. And that going through your 20s means it's going to be uncomfortable. You are in the first period of your life where all of a sudden you don't have a set agenda. You graduate college and then it's like, okay, take the leap of faith, go somewhere, do something. And a 9-to-5 job doesn't always work for someone. A desk job doesn't work for someone.
But there also probably could very well be that they're back at home. Like even if they have a 9-to-5 job, it's not paying enough and they have to live at home, continue to live at home.
Exactly. And so, that world isn't going to be what everybody's getting. And it's okay to accept that it's all a journey, and that everything's not perfect. And that you do have to fall back on family. That shouldn't have a negative connotation. So often I get, okay, you grew up on Bainbridge, you went to UW, you lived in Seattle for 5 years, I just moved back to Bainbridge in August. And I end up actually feeling like I have to justify why I moved back to Bainbridge. And it's like, why do I even have to make that justification?
Are you living on your own or with one of your parents?
I live in the guest house on my grandma's farm.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. And so that ended up being a beautiful space. I needed that space, especially just traveling so much, and city was not me. I think time and place like when I can actually afford to live in a place that I want to live in the city instead of just finding the cheapest, it'll be a different discussion. But I just feel like there's a lot of dishonesty with each other, especially when you say you're friends with someone about what you're actually going through and what it means to support a person and what a friendship is. And I think that's something where you can have fun and support someone and, like it is rainbows and butterflies when you hang out for 90% of the time. But then you also have that period where you're like, look, I actually think you're going down a horrible path. Or, like, I don't think that's probably the decision you want to be making. And to know that people can have constructive criticism and not be out there just to get you, where there's this sense of competition amongst your peers. And, all of that just needs to be broken down and allowing that space of just honesty.
Well, it's probably hard too when you feel like you're spending time with someone because you see them on Facebook or Instagram all the time. And that's where it does look perfect. And then you realize, so the time that you spend together, you don't want to be the complaining, this is the backstory. This is what's really happening. So you don't bring it to the table because you feel like the time that you are spending together, and that's like in air quotes because you're not really spending that time, but like, this is all great. And then when you and I sit down and have a conversation over dinner, I spill out what's really going on. Like, that's not how you want to spend your time. So that's got to be, that I'm sure just like compounds the problem.
But it's also like, that's natural, there has to be some kind of space for that.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But my point is that the 90% of time that we're spending together isn't really spending together. Like, we're not like going shopping together. We're not going for a walk, down on Alki Beach together. It's it's the more perfection, it's the appearance.
Yeah. Well, and like the text messages in between or, and so I didn't really think about that, but that's true. Because in my mind, like, I was already defining my period of time with someone as being in person with them. But I think a lot of people think that they're connected because they're Snapchatting or they're texting. And then that ends up creating that empty relationship or friendship. And yeah, I think it's confusing. I don't know how to define it. I feel a lot of discomfort though in
it's
the millennials.
Tough. Yeah, it's a really tough time. Like, I would not want to be growing up, I wouldn't want to be a teenager right now. It has to be so incredibly difficult. In one way, it's like, it's nice because I have the benefit of, especially with travel, kind of old school travel where it costs $3 a minute to call home to your family. So you didn't call home, except on very special occasions, or it took, a month for a letter to arrive from Southeast Asia, to New Jersey, to my family in New Jersey. And that was a really special time. And now we can just disconnect from the culture so easily that it's like we're not even there, or we're getting so many recommendations off of TripAdvisor or, Yelp to go do something that we're not thinking our own thoughts. We're not making our own decisions and making our own mistakes.
That's
too.
So true. And I think that's a great thing to talk about as well, just in the fact that you got to own it, and just accept it, and you will make mistakes. But also now's the time in my peer group's life, I think, to really take those risks. And if you aren't happy, face it and change it, because you do have that ability right now. And to go for long periods of time without being happy, I think really just lies on your own shoulders. Like, you do have the ability to quit your job. You can find another one. You might have to waitress for a little bit. You might have to nanny for a little bit. I still nanny on the side because I recognize that I want to be doing what I'm doing, but I also never want to put myself in a financial situation that I can't get out of. And so if that means being a little bit more creative on how you fill in the blanks, then you do. And that's not a bad thing. And if you can start figuring out more of what makes you you and your path and what fires you up, then that's what we should be doing in our 20s. I think.
Or 30s, 40s, 50s. Like, I know, I mean, I know so many people. I shouldn't say that. I know people who have been out of work for a long time, but they won't take a job that they feel is like beneath them. I had a friend, I won't say her name, but she was in the Seattle area, who was like basically almost homeless because she didn't have a place to go with her dog and was getting kicked out of her apartment. And but she wouldn't take just any old job. And this went on for years. And I just think you got to hunker down.
And just do it.
I know.
Yeah.
Like, pride aside, like believe me, I fantasize about taking a job at Starbucks and pulling coffee for Joe who comes in. Like, hey, Joe, what do you want today? You know, like that would be like, I will, if, maybe one day I'll buy a coffee shop, but something that to me wouldn't be super stressful.
Right. And has boundaries. I crave.
Oh, that's a good point. It has
having boundaries and structure. And it's so funny because I went through that whole thing of just being like, okay, Danielle, like you're going to get an office job and you're going to sit down and do it. So I got an office job for 2 days a week and that lasted a month. Like I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And being able to just be honest with myself was difficult because then again, I fell into that routine of being like, okay, now I have to justify to everybody around me, like I am going to start nannying again. And I'm doing it because
there's
of
more
this,
freedom
this, and this.
in that, right?
But there's more freedom. I get to choose my hours and I get to remain in a space where I can put all my mental capacity towards my projects. And I was writing insurance survey reports for damaged boats and not in my wheelhouse, but also a whole level of skills that I had to learn, which was fine. But I came to the space again where it was like, you know what? I do need to make money, but I also need to have that space where I'm hanging out and running around with kids and having a creative outlet. And if that means I go back to nannying for a little bit, that means I go back to nannying for a little bit. And I really don't need to justify that to anybody. But that's a difficult thing to come to terms with because everything in me and everybody around me was like, at some point you should probably be like buckling down and getting that office job, making sure that you have the benefits lined up.
Oh, thank goodness. Thank goodness you didn't.
And I couldn't.
You just got to follow your heart with that. I had a job once because I've always cobbled together a bunch of different jobs.
Yeah.
Like, okay, how can I make money and then go and save all my money and then go travel? Like have these jobs, have a few jobs, make money, put it away, and then go travel. And that's always what I did. But there was a brief time when I had like a job and I was miserable. It was terrible. It was the jumping off point. Like the job that I had was it was so terrible that it was the jumping off point for me starting my own business because I just thought, never again am I going to work for somebody. I just can't do that. I just need that. I need that freedom, but it's coming to terms to that with
it
that.
Is. But then to also recognize that there's different people out there and different types. And by that, I mean different types of people.
Yes.
Because for me, there's like no way that could ever work. I need to have that freedom and that critical thinking space to be able to feel like I'm growing as an individual, but then also progressing whatever project I may be on. But then through working with so many interns, I've really now come to realize that there's some people that need that structure.
Yeah. They want to be told what to do, like in a good way. I'm saying that. Yeah. They want to know that the hours are 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, and just like what is expected of them because they don't. I mean, that's what I hear that from a lot of people. Like, I work from home and John basically is working from home now too. He's a mentor for technology people, for like managers. And so he's around a lot. But before that, I was home alone at home all day, which I reveled in. I love it. I get so much done, just like hunker down. But I know a lot of people are like, oh, no, there's no way. I've got to go to an office and I've got to be out of the house. And that's the only way they can work. So, yeah, you're right. Everybody's different. It just depends.
And that's just where I feel like I have to be careful with the input or advice I can give to people, because in my world, if I'm like, you're unhappy? Quit it. Figure something out.
I know.
Do some,
I'm the same way.
Shake it up. And to recognize that that's not how people find comfort or happiness.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know Chris Gillaboo? Are you familiar with him? He lives down in Portland. He has a podcast. I don't know if he's keeping it up every day, but he has a book out. I think it's called Side Hustle.
Yeah.
And he has a podcast. At least I know for a long time, he was posting a podcast episode every day featuring somebody who has a side hustle. And the whole idea is that, okay, so if you're not fulfilled in your day job, what can you do as a side hustle? Either something that brings you joy in the evenings or the weekends, or that is eventually a jumping off point to a bigger business. So kind of fostering that whole thing. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to find purpose. If we have to stay at a job because that's how we get our health insurance, that's one thing, and you have to take care of your family. But if there's something that really brings you joy, then you've got to pursue that.
You got to do it.
Yeah. That seems like a really great place to kind of end it on, unless you have anything else that you want to.
We covered so much.
I know. This
sums it up pretty good.
It's actually pretty amazing. I end these conversations by asking the guest, what does it mean to you to be bold?
Oh, wow. It's funny. That gives me goosebumps, just because I think that each one of us has such an opportunity to be bold. And for me, being bold means being honest. And yeah, I think I actually would just keep it to being honest. Period. I don't think that needs anything else, because I think for each one of us, we know what being honest means. And it can be so difficult to do.
It can be. I think we try to numb ourselves in so many different ways. Food, alcohol, smoking, other addictions, and social media. And it's really hard to get to the root of things, to be honest with yourself, when all you're doing is not paying attention. You earlier in the conversation, you were talking about kind of that empty feeling of like being like social media, like there's just like this emptiness about it. And I think oftentimes a problem is that people just don't identify their own feelings. They don't know what they're going through. And I try to be pretty aware of myself, and certainly I'm not the vast majority of time. It's like
it's hard.
It is really difficult. Yeah. But I do try to be aware, and sometimes I try to, like, I'm a Buddhist practitioner and a meditator, and through kind of like some of the teachings that I've read and learned about, it's like taking that pause, taking that breath, and not being reactive to things. And then you kind of think like, okay, where do I feel this in my body? Like, how did my breathing change? Why am I angry about this? Why does this upset me? How can I just take a pause and be better at responding to things so that they just don't inflame. Like I think about responding to people via email. Like, okay, let me just take a night. Let me overnight on this and not
take a moment.
Yeah, just take a moment and like not comment on somebody's thread, on Facebook or whatever. But I think it's like a lost art. I think there's a pendulum. I think as we get more stressed out and more disconnected, I think people are, like meditation, like I've been talking about meditation for a long time, maybe 10 years or so, but it was like, I meditate, it's like, you don't like, I'm kind of weird. Like people are going to think I'm weird. And now everybody's like, I meditate, blah, like I meditate 20 minutes twice a day kind of thing. So everybody talks about it.
And one of my most valuable spaces and tools that I have found is working with a shaman.
Oh.
And
in Peru.
No, actually, I met him on Bainbridge Island, and then I was exposed to medicine men, healers, and shamans in Peru, and that just kind of ended up expanding my growth and understanding of it all.
Is this someone, can you say his name on the podcast? Or
yeah,
can you give
it's Will Whitesmith.
Okay.
And he is based off of Bainbridge Island. Absolutely incredible healer and guide and shaman, but did not mean to find him by any means. He was over to dinner with my mom's book group one night, and we ended up just talking. And it was being able to find that and not have the preconceived notion of what that all meant and be open to that space that ended up being so valuable. And it is the same kind of thing with meditation. And at this point, I think it's not talked about nearly as much as meditation in terms of shamanism, healing. energy work,
Mm-hmm.
but it's all energy work.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to come to understand your actions and reactions and energy levels and how that's connected with time and space is all something that I think for me just gave me a greater understanding and sense of peace, because it validated so many of these things that I was feeling but no one ever talked about. So I'm incredibly grateful that I found him. But I think each person needs to be open to what it is that they need. And if that means more formal religion and going to church every Sunday, by all means. My mom goes to church every Sunday. But I think that there is something to be said for finding that area that makes you think about you and how you think, how you perceive, how you're connected. And so it's not always the same for every person, may not be super structured. I know I take my thought process and spirituality and energy work from many different facets of all the different cultures, all the different religions, all the different people, environments that I've been exposed to. But I hope that more and more people take the time to be able to explore that.
Thanks for that. Where can people find you on social media?
Yes, after all that, I am on social media.
Yeah, or on your website or wherever. What's the best place to find out more about you?
I keep pretty up-to-date work going on Instagram, and my handle is Dani Bog, just DANIBOG. And then Connect3 has an Instagram, and that's EWW, so Education, Waste, and Water _Connect3. And Yuryadi's Village also has their own Instagram, and that's URYADIS Village. And then I'm on Facebook, but also our websites are www.connect-3.org and www.yuryadisvillage.org. And that's pretty much the main platform. Facebook stuff all comes up, but that's mostly
It's more personal stuff,
and you can find our organizations on there. But I think just in terms of getting involved or how we could help you, I think that's something we're also really trying to advocate as Connect3. If you're an organization out there, if you travel somewhere, reach out to us and maybe we can help in those communities as well.
I want to talk to you about Papua New Guinea.
Oh, I'm fascinated by that. I wanted to dive into that so much more because I was like, that is a situation that is reaching out.
Mm-hmm. And I want to go to Peru with you too.
Oh, that would be amazing. It's such a special place and unfortunately is changing rapidly.
Yeah. I was only in the Ecuadorian Amazon, but it's my we'll talk offline, but just really my lifelong interest in indigenous cultures. That's what brings me to P&G every year. But I don't know what to do with it. Like I have this love and this interest, but I don't. So we'll have to connect offline. And
I know there's so much to talk about.
Oh,
it's been so fun.
God. It is great. Thank you so much for coming out here too. I appreciate it.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much.
Are you as blown away by her as I am? I love feedback, so let me know what you think. Beth at shesboldpodcast.com or 877-280-5170. I would love to know what you think. For links to all the things we chatted about in this episode, go to shesboldpodcast.com/episodes, and there you will find the show notes for this and all of my other conversations. You can also find those links and show notes in whatever podcast app it is you're using to listen to this. If you'd like to support the show and let me know how much you are inspired by these conversations and how much you look forward to hearing all these uplifting stories, go to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. Patreon supporters become part of our private Facebook group and get access to bonus content, which is usually in the form of a question I ask the guests. So you get a little bit of inside information on that. For as little as $2 a month, you can join our community. Don't forget to check out my tours at wandertours.com. I mentioned I'm headed to Ireland next week. I've got a few spots on my trip to Morocco in February. That's a women-only tour, and I have space on Papua New Guinea next August, and that includes one led by National Geographic photographer Allison Wright, and you've heard her here on the podcast. That's episode number 68. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm WonderGal on Instagram. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/group/Be Bold group for support and encouragement for whatever ways you're trying to be bold. We've also got meetups going on across the country. We just had our second Be Bold meetup here in the Seattle area on Sunday night, and that was a lot of fun with some local gals. And we've got some other communities across the country that are starting to form. So you can get that information in that Facebook group. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. Hope to see you in Tucson. Until next time, be bold.